The rough burlap sack scratched against Nora's cheek as she hauled another load of firewood toward the homestead, her arms trembling with exhaustion, and she wondered if anyone in this harsh wilderness would ever notice she existed at all. 21 years she had walked this earth without once seeing her own reflection clearly. The muddy creek water showed only a wavering shadow. The polished tin plates in the wagon train reflected distorted shapes that meant nothing. When her mother had died, giving birth to her younger brother, the only looking glass in their possession had been buried with her, wrapped in her cold hands, as though beauty mattered more in death than life ever had. Her father, Silas Cartwright, had never bothered to replace it. "What use did a working girl have for vanity?" he would say, his voice rough as sandpaper and twice as abrasive. Nora set down the wood beside the lean. To that served as their shelter on the outskirts of Aspen, Colorado, in the spring of 1876. The Rocky Mountains loomed in every direction, their snow-capped peaks touching clouds that seemed close enough to grasp. Aspen itself was a mining town, born from silver strikes and sustained by the endless hope of men who believed fortune lay just beneath the next layer of rock. The town had sprung up only a few years prior, raw and unfinished, populated by prospectors, merchants, and the occasional family trying to carve out something permanent from the unforgiving landscape. Her father had brought them here chasing rumors of work at the mines. He had found it, breaking his back daily in the dark tunnels, but the pay was meager, and his temper had grown worse with each passing month. Nora's younger brother, Timothy, had taken ill with mountain fever 2 winters back and never recovered. Since then, her father barely spoke, except to issue commands or criticize. She straightened, pressing her palm against the small of her back where an ache had settled permanently. Her dress was patched and faded, the original color long forgotten. Her hands were calloused and rough, nails broken from labor. She had no idea if her face was plain or pleasant, if her eyes held any warmth, if her figure resembled anything a man might find appealing. She only knew she was strong enough to survive, and some days that felt like the only truth worth knowing. "Girl, where is my supper?" her father's voice bellowed from inside the lean-to. Nora grabbed the bucket and headed toward the creek, knowing she needed to fetch water before she could even start cooking the beans and salt pork that comprised their evening meal. The April air still carried winter's bite, especially as the sun began its descent behind the mountains. She walked quickly, her worn boots navigating the familiar path through scrub pine and aspen trees, their white bark glowing in the fading light. The creek ran fast with snowmelt, ice-cold and clear. She knelt beside it, dipping the bucket carefully. The water's surface showed her something that might have been a face-pale oval, dark smudges that could be eyes, a shape that suggested a mouth, nothing more. She had stopped trying to see herself years ago. A branch snapped behind her. Nora spun, water sloshing over the bucket's rim, her heart suddenly hammering. A man stood at the edge of the clearing, massive and still as the mountains themselves. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders so broad they blocked out the trees behind him. Long, dark hair fell past his shoulders, partially tied back with a leather cord. His face was all hard angles, strong jaw covered in several days' worth of beard, prominent cheekbones, a straight nose that looked like it had been broken and healed more than once. But his eyes caught her breath, deep brown, almost black in the dimming light, and fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel suddenly, strangely visible. He wore buckskin clothing, a heavy coat over a worn shirt, trousers that had seen hard use, and boots that reached his knees. A rifle rested in the crook of his arm with casual familiarity. Everything about him spoke of strength, danger, and something untamed that the town had never quite managed to touch. "Did not mean to startle you, miss," he said, his voice deep and rough, like stones tumbling in a river. "Heard someone at the creek and wanted to make sure it was not a bear after the fish." Nora found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "Just me. Getting water." He nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving her face. She resisted the urge to look away, to duck her head as she usually did when the rare person bothered to look at her directly. Something about this man made her want to stand taller instead. "You from the town?" he asked. "The homestead just north of here. My father works the mines." "Hard life?" "The only life I know." The words came out sharper than intended, defensive. The corner of his mouth quirked, not quite a smile, but something close. Did not mean offense. I am Hank Henderson. I have a cabin about 5 miles west, up in the high country. Come down sometimes for supplies or to check my trap lines. A mountain man, then. Nora had heard of them, the solitary men who lived in the wilderness, surviving by hunting, trapping, and sheer stubbornness. They were rare even in Colorado, remnants of an earlier time when the frontier had been even wilder than it was now. Nora Cartwright, she said, and then felt foolish for offering her name. What did it matter to him? But Hank nodded as though she had given him something valuable. Good to meet you, Nora Cartwright. You should be careful out here alone. Sun is setting. Mountain lions hunt at dusk. I have been fetching water from this creek for 8 months. Have not seen a mountain lion yet. That you know of. His eyes held something that might have been amusement. They are better at seeing you than you are at seeing them. Despite herself, Nora felt her lips twitch toward a smile. I will be careful. See that you are. He touched 2 fingers to his forehead in a casual salute, and then turned, moving into the forest with surprising silence for a man his size. Nora stood there for a moment, bucket forgotten, watching the space where he had been. Something had shifted in that brief exchange, though she could not name what. She shook her head, hoisted the bucket, and hurried back to the homestead before her father's temper could worsen. That night, as she lay on her bedroll listening to her father's snores, she thought about Hank Henderson's eyes and the way he had looked at her. Not through her, not past her, but at her, as though she was something worth seeing. The memory warmed her more than her thin blanket ever could. 3 days passed before she saw him again. She had been gathering wild onions in a meadow about a mile from the homestead, her basket half full, when she heard a sound that froze her blood. A low growl, deep and threatening, coming from the tree line to her left. She turned slowly. A bear, massive and brown, stood on all fours about 30 yards away, not close enough to charge immediately, but far too close for comfort. Its small eyes fixed on her, and she could see its nostrils flaring as it tested her scent on the wind. Nora's mind raced through everything she had ever heard about bears. Do not run. Make yourself large. Back away slowly. But her body refused to cooperate, frozen in pure instinctive terror. The bear took a step forward. A gunshot cracked through the air, echoing off the mountains. The bear reared up, startled, and then dropped back to all fours and lumbered away into the forest, crashing through underbrush in its haste to escape. Nora's legs gave out, and she sat down hard in the meadow grass. Hank appeared from the opposite tree line, rifle still raised, watching until the sounds of the bear faded completely. Then he lowered the weapon and crossed to her in long strides. Are you hurt? She shook her head, unable to speak past the fear still clogging her throat. Hank crouched beside her, and she was struck again by his sheer size. Up close, she could see the muscles of his forearms where his sleeves were rolled back, the breadth of his chest, the power in his thighs. He could probably snap her in half without effort, yet his hand was gentle when he touched her shoulder. Breathe, he said quietly. It is gone. You are safe. Nora drew in a shaky breath, then another. The terror began to recede, replaced by embarrassment. I froze. I knew I should move, should do something, but I could not. Most people freeze their first time facing a bear. The ones who say otherwise are liars. His hand remained on her shoulder, warm and steady. You did well enough. You did not run. Only because my legs would not work. That almost smile appeared again. Still counts. She met his eyes and felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. This close, she could see flecks of gold in the brown of his irises, could smell wood smoke and pine and something else, something purely him. You shot to scare it, not kill it, she said, realizing. Bear was just being a bear. No need to kill it unless it was set on killing you. The shot was enough to change its mind. He stood, offering her his hand. Come on. I will walk you back to your place. You should not be out here alone. I have to gather food, she protested, even as she took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. His palm was calloused and rough, his grip strong enough to lift her effortlessly. My father will be angry if I come back with nothing. Hank's expression darkened slightly. Your father should be angry at himself for letting his daughter wander bear country without protection. He works the mines all day. He cannot be bothered to make sure you are safe. It was not a question. Nora said nothing, which was answer enough. She bent to retrieve her basket, but Hank was faster, scooping it up along with his rifle. "I will help you gather what you need, and then I will walk you home. No arguments." There was something in his tone that made argument impossible, not because it was harsh, but because it was final. Nora found herself nodding. They worked in silence for a while, Hank keeping watch while Nora found onions, early mushrooms, and a few other edible plants. He seemed to know the land intimately, pointing out a patch of wild garlic she had missed, showing her where watercress grew along a small stream. His presence made her hyper-aware of her movements, her appearance. She wished desperately that she knew what she looked like, whether there was dirt on her face, whether her hair was hopelessly tangled. "You know the land well," she said, partly to distract herself from such foolish thoughts. "Been living in these mountains for 6 years. You learn or you die." He paused. "Came out here after the war." The war between the states had ended 11 years ago, but its shadow still stretched long. Nora did not ask which side he had fought for. It did not seem to matter anymore. "You like it? The solitude?" Hank considered this, his gaze traveling over the mountains. "I did. Seemed easier than dealing with people. The wilderness does not lie, does not betray. It just is." He looked back at her. "But it is a lonely way to live." Something in his voice made her chest tighten. "Why stay then?" "Been asking myself that lately." His eyes held hers. "Starting to think maybe there are reasons to come down from the mountain more often." Heat flooded Nora's face and she looked away quickly, fumbling with an onion. Her heart was beating too fast, her hands suddenly clumsy. She did not know how to respond to the weight of meaning in his words. Hank cleared his throat. "Your basket is full enough. Come on." He walked her back to the homestead, staying alert the entire way, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. At the edge of the clearing where the lean-to stood, he stopped. "I will be checking my trap lines in this area regularly," he said. "If you need anything, if there is trouble, you fire 3 shots in the air. I will hear and I will come." "We do not have a gun," Nora admitted quietly. His jaw tightened. "Then take this." He pulled a small pistol from his belt, pressed it into her hands along with a handful of bullets. "Do you know how to shoot?" "No." "Then I will teach you. Tomorrow. Meet me at the creek at midday if you can get away." "My father." "Your father works the mines during the day. He will not know." Hank's expression was stern. "You need to know how to protect yourself, Nora. This is not negotiable." She should refuse. She should be offended by his presumption, his commands. Instead, she found herself nodding, clutching the pistol carefully. "Tomorrow at midday." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his harsh features into something almost beautiful. "Good. Now get inside before you catch cold." Nora watched him disappear into the forest before she turned toward the lean-to, hiding the pistol in the folds of her skirt. Her father was still at the mines. She had time to hide it properly before he returned. That night, she lay awake again, but this time her thoughts were full of deep brown eyes and a smile that made her feel like the sun had come out from behind clouds she had not realized were there. The next day, Nora told her father she was going to look for a hen that had wandered off. He grunted acknowledgement without looking up from the whiskey bottle that was becoming his constant companion. She hurried away before he could ask questions. Hank was already at the creek when she arrived, and with him was a collection of tin cans arranged on a fallen log. He turned at her approach, and again she felt that strange sensation of being truly seen. "Thought you might not come," he said. "Why?" "Because I am a stranger, and you have no reason to trust me." Nora tilted her head, considering. "You saved me from a bear. That seems like a decent reason." "Fair point." He gestured to the cans. "We will start simple. First rule of shooting is respect the weapon. It is not a toy. Every time you pick it up, you assume it is loaded and ready to fire." He spent the next hour teaching her the mechanics of the pistol, how to check if it was loaded, how to aim, how to breathe and squeeze the trigger rather than pull. His hands covered hers as he adjusted her grip, and she tried not to think about how warm his skin was, how her pulse jumped at every casual touch. "Now try," he said, stepping back. Nora raised the pistol, aimed at the center can, and fired. The recoil startled her and the shot went wide, disappearing into the forest somewhere behind the target. "Good first try. You did not drop the gun or close your eyes. Try again." She fired again and again. By the 10th shot, she managed to clip the edge of one can, sending it spinning off the log. The small victory made her grin. "There," Hank said, and there was pride in his voice. "You are a natural." "Hardly. I have hit one can out of 15 shots? You will get better. Takes practice." He reloaded the pistol for her. Again. They worked until the ammunition was gone. Nora had managed to hit 3 cans by the end, and while she knew she was far from proficient, she felt more capable than she had when the day started. "Keep the pistol with you," Hank said as they collected the cans. "Practice the motion of drawing it, aiming. The muscle memory will help." "When will I see you again?" The question escaped before she could stop it, too eager, too revealing. But Hank did not seem to mind. "Day after tomorrow? Same time? I can bring more ammunition, keep working with you." "I would like that." They stood there in the dappled sunlight, and Nora wished she could see herself through his eyes, could know what he saw when he looked at her with that intensity that made her feel both terrified and exhilarated. "Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly. Anything." "What do I look like?" Hank's expression shifted, surprise followed by something softer. "You have never seen yourself?" "Not clearly. We had no mirrors. My mother's looking-glass was buried with her. I know the shape of my face by touch, but I do not know if I am plain or if my eyes are set too close together or if my nose is too large. I do not know what color my eyes are beyond not light. I do not know any of it." He stepped closer, and she caught her breath. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek. "Your eyes are blue," he said quietly. "Not sky blue. Deeper than that. Like the color of the lake up in the high country just before sunset, when the water holds the last of the day's light. Your hair is brown, but it has gold in it when the sun hits it right, like it is now. Your nose is straight and fits your face perfectly. Your mouth." He paused, his thumb brushing her lower lip so briefly she thought she might have imagined it. "Your mouth is soft and full, and I have been thinking about it more than is probably proper." Nora's breath came short. "I do not know if you are telling the truth or being kind. I am many things, Nora Cartwright, but I am not a liar." His hand cupped her face now, his palm warm against her cheek. "You are beautiful. More than that, you are strong, you are brave. You work yourself to exhaustion for a father who does not appreciate you, and you still have kindness in your eyes when you look at the world. That is what I see. That is the truth." Tears stung her eyes and she blinked them back furiously. She could not remember the last time someone had spoken to her with such gentleness, had touched her as though she was something precious. "I do not feel beautiful," she whispered. "Then I will tell you every day until you believe it." He leaned down, slowly enough that she could pull away if she wanted, and pressed his lips to her forehead. The kiss was chaste, gentle, but it sent warmth flooding through her entire body. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers. "I should not have done that." "Why not?" "Because I am falling in love with you, and I do not want to rush you or push you into something you are not ready for." The honesty of it stole her breath. No games, no coy deflection, just the raw truth spoken plainly. "What if I am falling too?" she asked. His smile was like sunrise. "Then I am the luckiest man in the Colorado Territory." They met every other day after that when Nora could manage to slip away. Hank taught her to shoot with increasing accuracy, brought her small gifts from the wilderness, a perfect bird's egg, a piece of quartz that caught the light, wildflowers that he tucked into her hair. They talked about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about the war that had stolen his youth and left him with nightmares he could not shake, about finding peace in the mountains when nowhere else felt safe. She told him about her mother, dead now 12 years, who had sung while she worked and made their wagon feel like home even in the middle of the plains. About Timothy, her sweet brother who had loved collecting rocks and telling stories. About the loneliness that had become so familiar she had forgotten it was not normal. "Come with me," Hank said one afternoon as they sat by the creek, his arm around her shoulders in a way that now felt natural as breathing. "Up to my cabin. Let me show you where I live." Nora hesitated. Going to a man's cabin alone was improper, dangerous even, but she trusted Hank in a way she had never trusted anyone. "When?" "Now. We can be there and back before dark if we move at a good pace." She should say no, should make an excuse. Instead, she stood and offered him her hand. "Show me." The hike up the mountain was steep but beautiful. Aspen trees gave way to pine, and the air grew thinner, crisper. Hank moved with the confident grace of a man who knew every stone and root, but he kept pace with her, never rushing, his hand ready to steady her whenever the trail grew rough. His cabin sat in a small clearing with a view that made Nora gasp. Mountains stretched in every direction, their peaks still snow-covered, magnificent and eternal. The cabin itself was sturdy, built from logs chinked with mud and moss, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. "You built this?" she asked. "Every inch. Took me 8 months." He pushed open the door. "It is not fancy, but it is home." The interior was a single large room with a fireplace, a bed in one corner, a table and chairs, shelves lined with supplies. Furs covered the floor and the bed, making it warmer than she had expected. Everything was neat, organized, well-maintained, the home of a man who took care of what was his. "I love it," Nora said honestly. She could imagine living here, waking to that view every morning, building a life in this remote, beautiful place. "Could you really?" Hank asked, and she realized she had spoken aloud. "Love it, I mean. Love living this far from town, this far from other people?" She turned to face him. "I have never needed other people, just one person who sees me, who wants me to be here." "I see you, Nora." He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "I want you here. I want you in my life, in my home. I know we have not known each other long. 6 weeks, she said. 6 weeks that have meant more than the 21 years before them. Marry me." The words came out rough, urgent. "I know I should court you properly, should ask your father's permission, should do all the things society says are proper. But I do not care about proper. I care about you. I love you, Nora. Marry me and let me spend every day showing you how beautiful you are, how precious, how deeply wanted." Joy bubbled up in her chest, bright and wild. "Yes." "Yes?" He sounded almost shocked, as though he had not quite believed she would agree. "Yes, Hank. Yes, I will marry you. Yes to all of it." He kissed her then, really kissed her, his mouth claiming hers with a passion that made her knees weak. She wound her arms around his neck, pressing close, marveling at the feel of him, all solid muscle and strength, yet so careful with her, as though she was something that might break. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "We will do this right. I will come talk to your father, ask his permission even though I do not care if he gives it. We will find a preacher. You will have a proper wedding. I do not need proper. I just need you. You deserve proper. You deserve everything." He kissed her again, softer this time. "But first, we need to get you back before your father realizes you are gone." The walk down the mountain was both too long and too short. Nora did not want to leave the bubble they had created, where only the two of them existed. But reality waited at the base, and they would have to face it eventually. At the edge of her homestead, Hank caught her hand. "I will come tomorrow evening to speak with your father. Be ready." For what? For him to say no, for him to be angry, for all of it. His jaw set stubbornly. "But it will not change anything. You are mine, Nora, and I am yours. We will find a way." She kissed him quickly, and then hurried toward the lean-to before her courage could fail. Her father was home when she entered, sitting at their rickety table with his whiskey. He looked up with bleary eyes. "Where have you been?" "Gathering food, checking the snares." The lies came easily now. "Useless girl. There's nothing on the table for my dinner." Nora bit back a sharp retort and moved to start cooking. Her father watched her with the vague suspicion of the perpetually drunk, but he said nothing more. That night, she held the piece of quartz Hank had given her, turning it in the candlelight, watching it sparkle. Tomorrow, her life would change. Tomorrow she would fight for her future, for happiness, for love. She was ready. The next evening, Hank appeared just as the sun began to set. Nora's father was outside, attempting to repair a broken wagon wheel when the mountain man emerged from the tree line. Even from inside the lean-to, Nora could feel the shift in atmosphere. She hurried outside. Her father had straightened, eyeing Hank with the wariness of a small animal confronting a predator. "Silas Cartwright?" Hank asked, his voice level and polite. "Who is asking?" "Hank Henderson. I've come to speak with you about your daughter." Silas's eyes narrowed. He looked at Nora, then back at Hank. What about her? I would like your permission to marry her. Silence. Nora held her breath. Then Silas laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You? Marry her? She is not for sale, mountain man. I am not buying. I'm asking for your blessing. Why would you want her? She is plain, useless, good for nothing but work. Each word hit Nora like a physical blow, but she kept her face carefully blank. She had heard it all before. She is beautiful, capable, and worth 100 men like you. Hank's voice had gone dangerously quiet. And you will speak of her with respect. Silas's face reddened. You come onto my land and tell me how to speak about my own daughter. I come onto your land and tell you how to speak about the woman I love, a woman you have treated as little more than a servant. Hank took a step forward. He was half a foot taller than Silas and twice as broad, and the difference was suddenly very apparent. I am asking your permission because it is proper. But make no mistake, I will marry Nora with or without your blessing. The only question is whether you want to be part of her life going forward. She owes me. I fed her, clothed her, kept a roof over her head. A roof? Hank gestured at the lean-to with barely concealed contempt. You call that a roof? You have given her the bare minimum to survive and called it generosity. How dare you? How dare you, Hank interrupted, his voice hard as stone. Treat your own daughter like she is worth nothing. How dare you never tell her she is beautiful, never protect her, never give her a reason to smile. She deserves so much better than what you have given her. Nora's eyes burned with tears, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of vindication, of hearing someone finally speak the truths she had never dared voice herself. Silas looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in months. You want to marry him? Go live in the wilderness like an animal? Yes, Nora said clearly. I want to marry him. I love him. Then go. Silas turned back to his wagon wheel dismissively. Go and see how long you last when you are not beautiful anymore, when you are just another mouth to feed. He will regret it soon enough. Hank's fist clenched, but Nora touched his arm gently. It is fine. We have what we came for. We will be married within the week, Hank said coldly. If you have any decency at all, you will attend, but I am not holding my breath. He took Nora's hand, and they walked away. When they were out of earshot, she let out a shaky breath. I am sorry, Hank said immediately. I should not have lost my temper. I should have been calmer. You were perfect. She stopped walking and turned to face him. You were absolutely perfect. No one has ever defended me like that. No one has ever told him he was wrong to treat me the way he has. Thank you. He cupped her face in his hands. You never have to thank me for loving you. It is the easiest thing I have ever done. She kissed him there in the fading light, pouring all her gratitude and love into it. 3 days later, they were married in Aspen's small church by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through. Nora wore a simple dress that one of the town's merchants had kindly lent her, altered to fit with quick stitches. Hank wore his cleanest buckskin and had trimmed his beard. He looked impossibly handsome, and the way he watched her walk down the aisle made Nora feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. Her father did not attend. She had not expected him to, and the absence hurt less than she thought it would. A few townspeople came out of curiosity or kindness, the merchant who had lent the dress, the blacksmith who had sharpened Hank's knives a few times, a young woman named Sarah who worked at the general store and had always offered Nora a smile when she came to town. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Hank kissed her, applause rang out in the small church. Nora felt happiness bloom in her chest, so bright and fierce it was almost painful. They spent their wedding night in Aspen's only boarding house, a luxury Hank insisted on. The room was small but clean, with an actual bed and fresh sheets. Hank was gentle with her, patient, whispering how beautiful she was, how much he loved her, until she believed every word. He touched her like she was precious, like she was a gift he could not quite believe he had been given. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, he produced a small wrapped package from his bag. I have something for you, he said. Nora sat up, curious. She unwrapped the cloth carefully and gasped. It was a looking-glass, small, no bigger than her hand, with a simple wooden frame. But the reflection was clear and perfect. I rode to Leadville last week, Hank explained. Had to go to 3 different stores before I found one. I wanted you to see yourself, really see yourself." With trembling hands, Nora raised the looking glass. A woman looked back at her. Blue eyes, just as Hank had said, deep and bright, brown hair with gold highlights, tumbling loose around her shoulders, a straight nose, full lips, delicate features that were not perfect but were hers. She looked young, almost startled, and yes, she looked beautiful. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Hey," Hank said softly, wiping them away. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right." She looked at him through the mirror, seeing them both reflected together. "I spent my whole life not knowing what I looked like, thinking maybe I was too ugly to be worth looking at. But that was not why I never had a mirror. It was just that no one cared enough to give me one. I care." He kissed her shoulder. "And I will remind you every single day how beautiful you are, so even when you are not looking in that mirror, you will know." She set the mirror down carefully and turned to him, pulling him close. "I love you, Hank Henderson. I love you, Nora Henderson." The name sent a thrill through her. Nora Henderson. She was no longer just Cartwright's daughter, the forgotten girl who worked herself to exhaustion for no thanks. She was Nora Henderson, wife of a mountain man, a woman who was loved and cherished and seen. The next morning they packed up and headed to Hank's cabin. Their cabin now. The hike was familiar this time, and Nora felt only excitement as they climbed higher into the mountains. This was her home now. This wild, beautiful, remote place where only the two of them existed. Over the next weeks, Nora learned a new kind of life. Hank taught her to hunt, to trap, to read the signs of weather in the clouds and the behavior of animals. She learned to cook over the fireplace, to tan hides, to preserve meat for the winter. The work was hard, harder even than what she had done for her father, but it was different because it mattered. Every skill she learned, every improvement she made to the cabin was building their life together. And Hank kept his promise. Every morning when she woke, he told her she was beautiful. When she was covered in dirt from planting a garden, when her hair was tangled from the wind, when she was exhausted and irritable, it did not matter. He looked at her with those deep brown eyes and said the words like they were the most important thing he could possibly say. Slowly, Nora began to believe him. Summer came to the Colorado high country with explosions of wildflowers and warm breezes that smelled of pine. Nora had never been happier. She and Hank fell into an easy rhythm, working together during the day, tangling together at night, talking and laughing and building something precious and rare. One afternoon in late June, they were working together to expand the cabin, adding a second room for storage and someday, hopefully, children. Nora was holding boards in place while Hank hammered when she saw riders approaching through the trees. "Hank," she said quietly. He looked up immediately, following her gaze. His hand moved instinctively toward his rifle, but he did not grab it yet. "Stay behind me." There were 3 men, rough-looking, with hard eyes and weapons clearly visible. They rode up to the cabin and stopped, looking around with the casual entitlement of men who believed they could take what they wanted. "Nice place you have got here," the lead rider said. He was older, maybe 40, with a scar cutting through one eyebrow. "Seems like a shame for just 2 people to have so much space." "We like our privacy," Hank said calmly. His body was relaxed, but Nora could see the tension in his shoulders, the readiness to move. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" "Heard tell there was a mountain man living up here. We are prospecting, looking for new silver claims. Thought maybe you could point us toward promising territory." "The promising territory has all been claimed. You would do better heading to Leadville." The second rider, younger with mean eyes, spat on the ground. "We did not ride all the way up here to be turned away. Show us your maps. Let us see what you know." "I do not have maps. I know the land from living on it, and I am not inclined to share that knowledge with strangers who show up uninvited." The tension ratcheted higher. Nora's hand crept toward the pistol she now wore constantly at her hip, hidden beneath her skirt. The scarred man's eyes landed on her, and something ugly crossed his face. "That your woman?" "My wife, and you will speak of her with respect or leave, preferably both. Pretty little thing. Seems wasted up here with just you for company." Hank moved then, not toward his rifle but simply forward, placing himself fully between Nora and the riders. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. You have 3 seconds to leave before this gets very unpleasant. 1. The third rider, who had been silent until now, put his hand on his gun. You threatening us? 2. Hank, there are 3 of them, Nora whispered urgently. I know, 3. Everything happened fast. The third rider drew his gun. Hank was faster, his rifle somehow already in his hands, the shot cracking out before the man could even aim. The bullet took the rider's hat clean off his head. Next one goes through your chest, Hank said flatly. Leave. Now. The scarred man glared, but he was not stupid enough to challenge a man who could shoot like that. This is not over. Yes, it is. If I see you on my land again, I will not shoot to warn. I will shoot to kill, and I will be within my rights. Now get moving before I change my mind about letting you leave at all. They rode off, the hatless man scrambling to retrieve his hat first. Nora watched until they disappeared into the trees, her heart hammering. Are they gone? She asked. For now. Hank's jaw was tight. But they might come back. Men like that do not like being told no. What do we do? He turned to her, pulling her close. We be careful. We stay armed. And if they do come back, we defend what is ours. Nora nodded against his chest, breathing in his familiar scent. She had known the wilderness was dangerous. She had not quite realized that sometimes the danger came in human form. That night, Hank insisted they take turns keeping watch. Nora argued that she did not need special protection, that she could handle herself. He agreed, but pointed out that 2 sets of eyes were better than 1. They compromised, taking 4-hour shifts, the one awake keeping the fire going and staying alert for any sounds of approach. Nothing happened that night, or the next. A week passed with no sign of the riders, and Nora began to hope they had moved on to easier targets. She should have known better. It was late afternoon, the sun beginning its descent behind the western peaks. Hank had gone to check his trap lines on the far side of the mountain, and Nora was working in the garden, pulling weeds and checking on the vegetables that were just beginning to thrive in the rocky soil. She heard the horses before she saw them. 4 riders this time, including the 3 from before, and a new man, bigger than the others, with a face like weathered leather. Nora stood slowly, wiping her hands on her skirt. The pistol was a comfortable weight at her hip. She did not draw it, not yet, but her hand rested near it. Afternoon, Missy, the scarred man said, dismounting. The others followed suit. Your husband around. He will be back soon. She kept her voice steady, even though her pulse was racing. Good, good. We wanted to talk to him, make things right between us. Got off on the wrong foot last time. They were spreading out, she realized, casually, slowly, but definitely surrounding her. Fear spiked through her veins, but she kept her face calm. You can wait for him if you like. I will put coffee on. She turned toward the cabin, but the big new man blocked her path. That is mighty hospitable, but we thought maybe you could entertain us while we wait. I have work to do. You are welcome to wait, but I will not be entertaining anyone. The mean-eyed young one laughed. She has got spirit. I like that. Your husband made us look like fools, the scarred man said, his voice hardening. Shot at us, threatened us. That kind of disrespect cannot stand. You threatened his wife. What did you expect? Nora's hand inched closer to her pistol. We are going to teach him a lesson about sharing, about hospitality. He took a step toward her. And you are going to help us do that. Nora drew the pistol in one smooth motion, exactly as Hank had taught her. She aimed it directly at the scarred man's chest. Stop, right there, he laughed. You think you can shoot all 4 of us, little girl? No, but I can definitely shoot you. Question is, are you willing to die to find out if I will? The laughter faded. The scarred man's hand moved toward his own gun. Do not, Nora said sharply. I have been practicing. At this range, I will not miss. They stood frozen in a tableau of tension. Nora's arm was steady, her finger on the trigger, her eyes locked on her target. She had never shot a person before, but she knew with absolute certainty that she would if she had to. These men meant harm, and she would protect herself in her home with everything she had. Lower the gun and maybe we will go easy on you, the big man said. Leave my land and maybe I will not kill you, Nora countered. A rifle shot cracked from the tree line. Dirt exploded near the horses' hooves, sending them rearing and neighing in panic. Hank emerged from the forest like an avenging angel, his rifle raised, his face a mask of cold fury. Mount up and ride. Do it now or I start shooting for real. You and what army? The mean-eyed one sneered, though he was eyeing the rifle nervously. "Do not need an army. I have her." Hank jerked his head toward Nora, who still had her pistol trained on the scarred man. "And between the two of us, we can drop at least 3 of you before you even draw. Want to find out which one survives?" The big man grabbed the scarred one's arm. "This is not worth it. Let's go." "Like hell. Now!" The big man was already moving toward his horse. Slowly, reluctantly, the others followed. They mounted up, the mean-eyed one glaring daggers at Nora. "This is not over," he said. Hank shot again, this one so close to the man's horse that the animal bolted. The rider had to fight to keep his seat. "It is over. If I see any of you again, anywhere near here, I will kill you on sight. That is not a threat. It is a promise. Now ride." They rode, hard and fast, disappearing into the forest. Hank lowered his rifle and crossed to Nora in 3 long strides. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "I'm fine. I had it handled." But her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. The pistol wavered. He gently took it from her, setting both weapons aside, and pulled her into his arms. "You were magnificent. Absolutely magnificent. I have never been more terrified or more proud." "I thought they were going to—" She could not finish the sentence. "I know, but you stood your ground. You protected yourself in our home. You are the bravest person I have ever met." She clung to him, letting the fear work itself out in shaking breaths and tears she had not allowed herself to shed while the men were there. "We should report this to the law in Aspen," she said when she could speak again. "There is no real law in Aspen yet, just a part-time deputy who is more concerned with claim jumping than anything else. By the time he got up here, those men would be long gone." Hank pulled back enough to look at her. "But they know now that we will not be easy prey. Word will spread. They will move on to softer targets." "You're sure?" "I am sure. Bullies are cowards at heart. They want victims, not fighters. We showed them we are fighters." That night, they made love with a desperate intensity born of fear and relief, and the knowledge of how fragile everything they had built really was. Hank worshipped her body like it was sacred, whispered promises against her skin, told her over and over how much he loved her, how proud he was, how lucky he was to have her. Nora fell asleep feeling safe despite everything, wrapped in his arms, protected not by his strength alone, but by the partnership they had built. The riders did not return. Summer deepened into the full glory of high country July and August. Nora's garden flourished. She and Hank added the storage room and started planning a larger expansion for the following year. They hiked to the high lake he had mentioned once, the one whose color matched her eyes, and swam in its icy waters, laughing and splashing like children. One evening in early September, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Nora told him her suspicion. "I think I might be pregnant." Hank went very still. "You think?" "I have missed my monthly twice now, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings. I could be wrong, but—" He kissed her, hard and joyful. "You're sure? You really think?" "I'm not sure, but I think so. Maybe." A baby. He said it with such wonder, such pure happiness that tears sprang to Nora's eyes. "Our baby. Are you happy?" "Happy?" "Nora, I am—" He stopped, shook his head, laughed. "I do not have words for what I am. Terrified and ecstatic and so full of love I think I might burst." She laughed too, the tears spilling over. "Good. Because I feel exactly the same." They decided to wait another month before being certain, but as September gave way to October and Nora's symptoms continued, there was no more doubt. She was carrying their child. Hank became even more protective, if that was possible. He insisted she not lift anything heavy, not work too hard, not take any unnecessary risks. Nora bore his hovering with amused patience, knowing it came from love and fear in equal measure. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she reminded him when he tried to stop her from chopping firewood. "I know, but humor me anyway." She kissed him and handed over the axe. Winter came to the high country with all its brutal beauty. Snow piled deep, and the world outside their cabin became a white wilderness that was as dangerous as it was magnificent. They were prepared, though. The storage room was full of preserved meat, dried vegetables, grains purchased from Aspen before the passes became impassable. They had firewood stacked high and furs enough to keep warm through the coldest nights. Nora's belly grew, and with it grew her sense of awe at what was happening. Hank spent hours with his hand on her stomach, feeling their baby move, his face transformed with wonder every time. "Strong kicks," he would say, "going to be a fighter like the mother, or stubborn like the father." They talked about names, about what kind of life they wanted to give their child, about everything and nothing. The long winter nights were filled with conversation and laughter, and a contentment Nora had never known was possible. In late December, a warm spell briefly cleared the passes, and Hank insisted on riding down to Aspen to fetch a woman from town who had experience with childbirth. Mrs. Brennan was a sturdy woman in her 50s who had delivered more babies than she could count. She agreed to stay with them through the winter, especially since Nora was due in late March or early April. "Cannot have my wife giving birth with only me to help," Hank said firmly. "I know hunting and trapping and building. I know nothing about babies." Mrs. Brennan took over one corner of the cabin, bringing with her supplies and knowledge that eased Nora's secret fears. She was kind and practical, no nonsense about the realities of childbirth, but reassuring about Nora's health and strength. "You are built well for bearing," she told Nora. "Strong hips, healthy constitution. You will do just fine, dear." The winter deepened. Snow fell and fell and fell, until the cabin was half buried, and they had to dig paths just to reach the woodpile. But inside, they were warm and safe, a small haven of life and love in the frozen wilderness. Nora spent hours looking in her little mirror, watching as her body changed, as her belly grew round with their child. She looked different than she had on her wedding night. Her face was fuller, her skin glowing with health, her eyes bright with happiness. She looked like a woman who was loved, who was cherished, who was seen. She looked beautiful, and finally, she believed it. In late March, as the snow began to slowly recede and the first hints of spring touched the high country, Nora went into labor. It started in the early morning with pains that were unmistakable. Hank immediately went into a controlled panic, pacing and fretting and looking terrified. Mrs. Brennan took charge with brisk efficiency, settling Nora in the bed, sending Hank to boil water and gather supplies. "You're going to be fine," she told Nora firmly. "This is natural. Your body knows what to do." The labor was long and hard. Pain came in waves that stole Nora's breath and made her cry out, despite her determination to be strong. Hank held her hand, let her squeeze until his bones creaked, wiped the sweat from her face, and told her over and over how strong she was, how brave, how much he loved her. "I see the head," Mrs. Brennan said as evening approached. "One more push, dear, one more big one." Nora bore down with everything she had, screaming with the effort, and then suddenly the pressure released and a baby's cry filled the cabin. "A boy," Mrs. Brennan announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A healthy, strong boy." Nora collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and elated. Hank was crying openly, unashamed, as Mrs. Brennan cleaned the baby and wrapped him in soft cloth. "Here," she said, placing the baby in Nora's arms. "Meet your son." Nora looked down at the tiny face, red and scrunched and perfect. He had a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn brown like his father's. His little fists waved, and his cry had already softened to small fussing sounds. "He is beautiful," she whispered. "He is perfect." Hank touched one tiny hand with his large, rough finger. The baby's fingers wrapped around it instinctively. "Hello, son. I am your father, and I'm going to love you every single day of your life." They named him Henry, after Hank's brother who had died in the war. Henry Henderson, born in a cabin high in the Colorado Rockies on March 28, 1877. The weeks after Henry's birth were exhausting and wonderful. Nora learned to feed him, to change him, to interpret his different cries. Hank was a devoted father, walking the floor with Henry when he fussed at night, singing to him in a deep, rumbling voice, holding him with a gentleness that seemed impossible for such a large, rough man. Mrs. Brennan stayed for another month to make sure both mother and baby were thriving, then headed back to Aspen as the spring fully took hold and the passes cleared. "You have done well," she told Nora before she left. "That boy is lucky to have you for a mother." "I am the lucky one," Nora said, and meant it. Life settled into a new rhythm with Henry. He was a good baby, quick to smile, curious about everything. As he grew, his personality emerged stubborn, yes, but also joyful and affectionate. He loved his father with an adoration that made Nora's heart swell, reaching for Hank whenever he entered the room, laughing at his silly faces. Summer came again, and Nora worked the garden with Henry strapped to her back in a carrier Hank had fashioned. The baby was content to watch birds and clouds while she weeded and watered. In the evenings, the three of them would sit on the porch, and Nora would nurse Henry while Hank told stories, his hand resting on her shoulder, the mountains rising eternal around them. One evening in July, Hank produced the small mirror and held it up so Nora could see herself. "Look," he said softly. Nora looked. She saw a woman with sun-browned skin and laugh lines around her eyes. Her hair was pulled back in a practical braid, her dress was simple and worn, and she held a baby against her breast. She looked tired and happy and utterly content. She looked like a mother, like a wife, like someone who belonged exactly where she was. "What do you see?" Hank asked. "I see someone who is loved," Nora answered. "Someone who is happy, someone who has everything she ever needed and some things she never dared to want." "I see the same thing. Plus the most beautiful woman in the world." She laughed and swatted at him playfully. "You are biased." "Absolutely. And I will be biased every day for the rest of our lives." 2 years passed. Henry grew into a toddler, running on sturdy legs, chattering constantly, helping his father with small tasks and his mother in the garden. They celebrated his second birthday with a special trip down to Aspen, where the town had grown and become more established. There was a real sheriff now, a schoolhouse, more families putting down roots. Nora saw her father once from a distance. He looked older, more worn. He saw her too, saw Henry, but he did not approach. She felt a twinge of something not quite sadness, not quite pity, and then Hank's hand was on her shoulder and Henry was tugging at her skirt, and she let the moment pass. Some bridges once burned were not meant to be rebuilt. That fall, Nora discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she knew immediately, recognized the signs. Hank was just as thrilled, just as protective. Henry, when they told him he would be a big brother, seemed uncertain about the concept, but willing to accept it. Their daughter was born the following spring, on a warm April afternoon, with much less drama than Henry's birth. She came into the world quietly, barely crying. And when Mrs. Brennan placed her in Nora's arms, the baby opened her eyes and looked directly at her mother. "She has your eyes," Hank said, wonder in his voice, "that exact blue." They named her Hope, because that was what she represented, the hope they had both found in each other, the hope for the future they were building together. Henry adored his little sister once he understood she was staying. He would bring her flowers from the meadow, would sing to her the songs Hank had sung to him, would pat her head with careful gentleness. The cabin was full now, full of noise and laughter and love. They added another room, a bedroom for the children, and talked about maybe building a larger house eventually. But there was no rush. They had everything they needed. On a summer evening when Henry was 4 and Hope was 1, Nora sat on the porch with Hank, watching their children play in the grass. Henry was showing Hope how to pick flowers, his little voice serious as he explained which ones were prettiest. "Happy?" Hank asked, his arm around her shoulders. "So happy I cannot even find words for it." "Good," he kissed her temple, "because you deserve every bit of happiness in the world." Nora leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her. She thought about the girl she had been 3 years ago, the one who had never seen her own face clearly, who had believed she was worthless because that was what she had been told her entire life. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who saw herself reflected not just in mirrors but in her husband's eyes, in her children's smiles, in the life she had built with her own hands and heart. "I love you," she said. "I love you too. Always have, always will." The mountains rose around them, eternal and magnificent. The sun set in a blaze of color. Their children laughed in the grass, and Nora Henderson, who had once believed she was invisible, sat surrounded by a love so visible, so tangible, so real that it could never be denied or forgotten. She had never owned a looking-glass to see herself, but a mountain man had shown her beauty in his loving eyes, and that had made all the difference. Years continued to pass in the high country, each season bringing its own joys and challenges. Henry grew tall and strong, his dark hair and brown eyes marking him clearly as Hank's son, though he had Nora's quiet determination. Hope remained gentle and observant, her blue eyes missing nothing, her voice soft but her will iron. When Henry was 7 and Hope was 4, a third child joined them, another boy they named Thomas, with red gold hair that matched neither parent and green eyes that Mrs. Brennan declared must have come from some distant ancestor. He was a happy baby who rarely cried and seemed content to observe the world with calm interest. The cabin had become a true house now, with multiple rooms and a proper kitchen. Hank had built furniture with his own hands, a large table where they all gathered for meals, chairs that fit each family member, a rocking chair where Nora could nurse babies and later read stories to sleepy children. They made trips to Aspen several times a year now that the children were older. The town had continued to grow, bringing civilization slowly but surely to the wilderness. There were proper stores, a newspaper, even talk of a railroad spur that might connect them to the wider world. But Nora never wanted to leave the mountains. This was home, the cabin Hank had built, the garden she had coaxed from rocky soil, the meadows where their children played, the forests where they hunted and trapped. This was where she had found herself, found love, found purpose. One afternoon, when Thomas was about 6 months old, Nora was working in the garden while the baby napped in a basket nearby. Hope was helping, her small hands carefully pulling weeds, while Henry was off with Hank checking the trap lines and learning the skills he would need as he grew. Sarah from the general store in Aspen, who had become a good friend over the years, had ridden up for a visit. She sat on the porch steps watching Nora work with a wistful expression. "You have built something beautiful here," Sarah said. "We have been lucky," Nora replied, sitting back on her heels and wiping sweat from her forehead. "It is not luck. It is love and work and courage." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I envy you sometimes. You found exactly what you needed." "What do you need, Sarah?" The younger woman, she was only 19, sighed. "I do not know. Something more than measuring out flour and making small talk with minors. I want what you have. A partner, a purpose, a place that feels like home." Nora smiled. "You will find it. I did not think I would." And then Hank appeared by a creek and everything changed. "How did you know he was the one?" "Because he saw me, really saw me, not just what I could do for him or how I could serve him. He looked at me and saw someone worth loving." Nora glanced at Hope, who was concentrating fiercely on a stubborn weed. "And he never stopped seeing me that way, even when I was tired or dirty or difficult. That is how you know." Hope finally freed the weed and held it up triumphantly. Nora applauded, and the little girl beamed. Later that evening, after Sarah had ridden back to town and the children were all asleep, Nora and Hank sat by the fire. He was carving a new toy for Thomas, his large hands surprisingly deft with the small knife. Nora was mending one of Henry's shirts, her needle flashing in the firelight. "Sarah asked me how I knew you were the one," Nora said. Hank looked up, a smile playing at his lips. "What did you tell her?" "That you saw me." I do." He set down the carving and pulled her close, taking the mending from her hands. "Best thing I ever saw, too. Even with 3 children and gray hairs starting to show. Especially with 3 children and gray hairs, you are even more beautiful now than the day I met you." "You are still biased." "Still absolutely biased, still absolutely right." She kissed him, slow and deep, the kiss of 2 people who had learned each other's rhythms over years of partnership. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For giving me that first looking glass. For showing me I was worth seeing. You always were, Nora. You always were." More years passed. Henry turned 10, then 12, growing into a young man who was thoughtful and strong, protective of his siblings and devoted to his parents. He could trap and hunt and track as well as his father now, and Hank spoke often of how proud he was of the man his son was becoming. Hope at 9 was quiet and clever, always reading when she could get her hands on books, always asking questions that made Hank and Nora exchange amused glances over her head. She wanted to know everything about the world beyond their mountains, though she never expressed a desire to leave. Thomas at 5 was the wild one, always climbing trees, always getting into scrapes, always laughing. He kept them all on their toes with his boundless energy and his complete lack of fear. When Nora was 36 and Hank 39, a final child joined them, a daughter they named Grace. born during a spring thunderstorm that shook the house and made the children huddle together nervously until they heard their sister's strong cry. Grace had Hank's dark hair and Nora's blue eyes, and from the moment she arrived, she was determined and fierce, letting the world know exactly what she wanted and when she wanted it. "This one is going to be trouble," Mrs. Brennan said with a laugh, handing the baby to Nora. "This one is going to be magnificent," Hank corrected, stroking his daughter's tiny head with one finger. They were both right. The family of 6, soon to be 7, when Mrs. Brennan casually mentioned that Sarah from the general store had married a rancher and moved to a homestead not far from Aspen, formed a tight unit. The children were taught to work hard, to respect the land, to take care of each other. But they were also taught to laugh, to play, to appreciate beauty. Hank took each child one by one on special trips into the wilderness when they turned 8. He showed Henry the high lake, took Hope to a meadow filled with wildflowers, brought Thomas to a canyon where eagles nested. And someday, he would take Grace somewhere equally special, tailored just for her. Nora watched her husband with their children and fell in love with him anew every single day. He was patient when they struggled, firm when they needed guidance, playful when they needed joy. He was the father she wished she had had, and he was giving their children the gift of knowing they were loved unconditionally. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Hank took Nora on their own trip back to the creek where they had first met. The children stayed with Mrs. Brennan, who now lived with them during the summers to help with the household and the children. They sat by the water as the sun set, and Hank pulled out something wrapped in cloth. "I have something for you," he said. Nora unwrapped it carefully and gasped. It was a new-looking glass, larger than the first, with an ornate silver frame engraved with flowers and their initials. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "Look at yourself," he urged. She raised the mirror. A woman in her 30s looked back, her face weathered by sun and wind, but glowing with health and happiness. Laugh lines crinkled around her eyes. Her hair, pulled back in a braid, showed streaks of silver among the brown and gold. She looked strong. She looked loved. She looked like herself, fully and completely. "What do you see?" Hank asked, just as he had years ago. "I see a wife, a mother, a woman who has lived and loved and built something that matters." She lowered the mirror and looked at him. "I see someone who is exactly where she belongs. I see the woman I fell in love with at this very creek, who looked at me with those blue eyes and made me want to be worthy of her. I see the mother of my children, my partner, my best friend. I see beauty that goes so much deeper than skin, though you are still the most beautiful woman I have ever laid eyes on." He took the mirror from her and set it aside, then cupped her face in his hands. "I see my whole world, Nora. You are my whole world." She kissed him as the creek burbled beside them and the mountains rose eternal around them, the same mountains that had witnessed their first meeting, their first kiss, the building of their life together. "I love you, Hank Henderson. I love you, Nora Henderson, and I will love you every day for the rest of my life." Years continued their steady march. The children grew, each finding their own path. Henry, at 18, announced he wanted to try ranching, and with Hank's help, he claimed land in a valley not far from the cabin. Hope declared she would be a teacher and started studying with the new school teacher in Aspen, preparing for the day she might take over the position. Thomas, at 13, was still wild, but beginning to channel that energy into purposeful direction. He talked of becoming a guide, leading hunting and fishing expeditions into the high country. Grace, at 8, was already showing signs of her mother's strength and her father's determination, declaring she would do something important, though she had not decided what yet. Nora and Hank, now in their 40s, watched their children's independence with pride tinged with bittersweet nostalgia. The house that had once been full of small children's laughter now echoed with teenage debates and young adult planning. "We did well," Nora said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar colors. "We did," Hank agreed. "4 incredible humans we raised, 4 people who know they are loved and valued, 4 people who will make the world better." "When did we get old enough to have adult children?" He laughed. "I ask myself that every day. Seems like yesterday you were standing by that creek with a water bucket, looking startled by a strange mountain man." "You did startle me. Huge and fierce, appearing out of nowhere. And you stood your ground, did not run, did not cower. I knew right then you were special. She leaned into his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. They had done this thousands of times over the years, sat together in comfortable silence, watching the day end, grateful for what they had built. "Do you remember when I asked you what I looked like?" Nora said softly. "Every word, every moment of that day. I had spent my entire life invisible, and then you saw me, and everything changed." "You were never invisible, Nora. You just had never been looked at properly. The moment I saw you, I could not look away." She thought about the girl she had been 21, exhausted, believing herself worthless because that was what she had been told. She thought about the looking glass buried with her mother, about the years of never knowing her own face, about the loneliness that had been her constant companion. And then she thought about everything that had come after, the love, the children, the life, the partnership, the way Hank still looked at her every morning like she was the best thing he had ever seen. The way he still told her she was beautiful when she was covered in garden dirt or struggling with a difficult day. The way he had never, not once in over 20 years, made her feel anything less than cherished. "I am glad it was you," she said, "at that creek. I am glad you were the one who saw me. Best moment of my life, seeing you there. Well, until you said yes to marrying me, and until each of our children was born, and until about 1,000 other moments we have shared." He kissed the top of her head. "Seems like my whole life has been full of best moments since you entered it." They sat together as night fell, and stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Inside, they could hear the children, not children anymore really, but still theirs, talking and laughing. This was happiness, Nora thought, not the absence of hardship, because they had faced plenty of that, not perfection, because they were both flawed humans who made mistakes. But this love that endured, partnership that strengthened with time, family that was chosen and cherished every single day. She had never owned a looking glass to see herself, but a mountain man had shown her beauty in his loving eyes, and in doing so, he had given her everything she had never known she was missing. The years rolled on, gentle and rich. Henry married a rancher's daughter and brought his bride to meet the family. She was practical and kind, and Nora liked her immediately. Hope became the school teacher, just as she had planned, and brought learning to the children of Aspen and the surrounding areas. Thomas did become a guide, his knowledge of the high country and his easy charm making him popular with visiting hunters and fishermen. And Grace, at 16, announced she wanted to be a doctor, shocking everyone but surprising no one who truly knew her. Grandchildren began to arrive. Henry and his wife had twin boys first, energetic and loud and full of questions. Hope, who had married the new doctor in town, had a quiet daughter who loved books as much as her mother did. Thomas remained unmarried but happy, spending most of his time in the wilderness he loved. Nora and Hank, now in their 50s, found new joy in being grandparents. The cabin that had grown quiet as their children left became loud again, with visits from grandchildren who climbed trees and explored meadows and listened wide-eyed to their grandfather's stories. "We are not done yet," Hank would say whenever Nora marveled at their growing family. "Still have a lot of living to do." And they did. They took trips together, sometimes just the two of them, riding into the high country to places only they knew. They worked on projects, improving the house, expanding the garden, building a small barn. They helped their children and supported their dreams. Most importantly, they continued to love each other with the same intensity they always had. The passion had mellowed into something deeper, richer, but it had never faded. Hank still reached for Nora's hand when they walked. Nora still smiled when she heard his footsteps on the porch. They still made each other laugh. They still made each other feel seen. On their 25th wedding anniversary, all 4 children and most of the grandchildren gathered at the cabin for a celebration. There was food and music and laughter, and as the sun set, everyone gathered on the expanded porch. Henry stood and raised his glass. "To my parents, you taught us what love looks like, what partnership means, what it means to build a life with your own hands and heart. We are all better people because of your example." To Nora and Hank, everyone chorused, glasses raised. Later, after the celebration had wound down and the grandchildren were sleeping in piles of blankets around the house, Nora and Hank walked to their favorite spot, the overlook that showed the mountains in all their glory. 25 years, Nora marveled. Best 25 years imaginable, Hank replied. And I am greedy enough to want at least 25 more. That would make us very old. Do not care. I want every single day with you I can get. She leaned against him, and they stood together under the stars, the same stars that had witnessed their wedding, the birth of their children, every triumph and challenge of their lives together. Thank you, Nora said. For what this time? For everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For loving me when I did not think I was worth loving. For building this life with me. For every single day of these 25 years. Nora Henderson, you have been the greatest blessing of my life. Loving you has been the easiest, best, most important thing I have ever done. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. She turned in his arms and kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude and joy into it. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. Come on, Hank said. Let's go see our family. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, the windows glowing warm with lamplight, the sound of their children's voices drifting out into the night. This was their legacy, not wealth or status or fame, but love. Love given freely and returned abundantly. Love that had built a family, a home, a life that mattered. Nora thought back one final time to the girl she had been at 21, hauling firewood with arms that trembled, believing she was nothing because she had never been told otherwise. That girl could never have imagined this, the fullness, the richness, the absolute rightness of her life. She had been wrong, so wrong, about her own worth, but Hank had shown her the truth, had held up a mirror not of glass but of love, and in that reflection she had finally seen herself clearly, beautiful, loved, worthy, seen. And she had spent 25 years building a life that proved those truths over and over again. As they stepped onto the porch and into the warmth of their home, surrounded by the family they had created, Nora felt a completeness that defied description. This was everything. This was enough. This was more than enough. This was love in all its wild and wonderful glory. And it had saved her life in every way that mattered. The mountains stood eternal around them, witnesses to their story, and somewhere in the distance a creek burbled over stones, the same creek where a mountain man had once met a girl with a water bucket, and everything had changed. Some stories end. This one simply continued, day after beautiful day, for all the years that followed.